Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event. I am Becca, if you are not familiar with my channel. And today I'm going to be talking with the lovely, Harriet, also known as HR Moore. And we are going to be celebrating the release of Nation of the Sun, which is, I did my last reading vlog, actually, if anybody wants my thoughts personally on that. But if you would like to give us a little summary of what it's about.
Yeah, so it is a paranormal romance. Technically, it's set in our world, and it follows people who reincarnate. So that's really the difference, the kind of paranormal element, the only paranormal element. And in our world, there are different nations of people who reincarnate. So we follow the pagan nation, who are based in the UK and Europe. And then there are all kinds of other nations. So the Templars, who are based in North America. There are the Buddhists. There are a whole host of different, like the Vikings, a whole host of different nations. And they all are full of all of these people who've been reincarnating for hundreds of years. And so they've got all of these kind of backstories and this history between each other. And there's a lot of kind of political stuff that goes on. And we follow Casper and Amari. And Casper, and people who reincarnate are called demons. And Casper is a demon who always wakes up really early. So demons are born into a new life, and some of them wake up really quickly and remember their past lives, and some of them take a little while to remember their past lives. So Casper always wakes up pretty quickly. Amari, or Raina as she's known in her demon self, tends to take a little while, and everyone thinks she's kind of stubborn and annoying because it always takes her so long to wake up. And so Casper has to find her, and the book starts when he's just found her, and she is getting married to someone else, and he has to kind of pull her away from that relationship, introduce her to the pagan nation and the other demons, and try and wake up her demon self, basically, because they're on the brink of a war with the Templars, who are quite a hostile, aggressive nation. And Amari, or Raina, in her previous lives, was the one who was dealing with a lot of the relations with the Templars, and she has quite a complicated relationship with the leader of the pagans, who's called Jamie. And so they really need to wake her up to try and find out what happened in her past lives, to try and work out what to do now and going forwards.
Somebody actually has just asked a question that I was literally also just about to ask you, because one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is the reincarnation themes, because it is something, I will say I like it in theory because I haven't read that many books about it, but I love the idea of reincarnation, especially when it ties into romance. So what inspired you to have that as like a central theme of the book?
I've always really just loved the idea of reincarnation. I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
And I've read a couple of other books that have never kind of just hit the nail on the head for me. I feel like they kind of, a lot of the time, well, the books I've read, they can kind of, they get maybe like an echo of their previous lives. You know, they kind of might remember a little bit or something. And I've always been kind of like, I really wanted them to know everything that happened, and it to kind of continue through the world, all their lives. And then it was really funny when my daughter was born, my second daughter was born, my mother-in-law went, "Oh, she's been here before, hasn't she?" And I was like, yeah, is it like that, isn't it? not that I think my daughter is reincarnated, just gonna put that out there. But you know, it just kind of like sparked this kind of thought where I was like, yeah, and I'd always loved that idea, and it kind of just spiraled from there, really.
It is really cool. I also really liked how, with the reincarnation and the remembrance of everybody's like past lives, they have these communities where they hold on to like little mementos and artifacts from their past lives. And they also have like they travel a lot, they travel the world, they visit different nations, sometimes they join different nations. And I was wondering, the like with all of the artifacts and the cultural references in there, is that something that you really enjoyed researching to pick on like what kind of historical events that you wanted to represent within the storyline?
Totally. And I love the idea that, you know, in the same way that like you get with vampires in you know, other paranormal, where the vampires have been around for such a long time, so they've got all this history and all of these things that they've kind of collected over the years. I really love that idea. And so things like I was researching like missing paintings and stuff like that, which then I would like include because I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. You know, I can solve all of the mysteries of the world just through, you know, and just, you know, trying to work out how old they are and how old the artifacts should be, and then, you know, researching, okay, well, what would it actually, should those artifacts actually look like from that time? So yeah, that was definitely a fun part of the process.
I think that's definitely would be a scary part for me. Like making sure that the ages of the demons match up to the ages of the artifacts, and then also like having them as like real life things and like accurate to that time period. Um, there's also a lot of different cultures represented within the nations. Is there a particular reason why you decided to split the nations as they are? Because some of them are geographical, but some of them are not.
Yeah, I think they were the ones that just appealed to me the most. You know, so I love the whole pagan druid, you know, that whole kind of piece. So I was like, that was where I started, and then I just started to kind of think, well, what are the different influences that I can just kind of think of from around the world? And Vikings, I'm like, yeah, you know, love the Vikings, love the show Vikings, love everything about that. So I was like, you know, that's great, and just kind of started to think through what the different regions of the world are and what the different religions are and what the different kind of influences are, and just kind of wrote a list of them. And yeah, and that was really how it went. And then I was like, well, they wouldn't just all be big, you'd have some little ones. So then kind of pulled out, because actually it's surprising how many different groups there are around the world. And so then I kind of would amalgamate a few people together to be like, well, okay, they've had some history where they've come together or they've split apart or whatever. And then I was kind of trying to work out what the North American one would be, because it's new, you know, so I have Native American groups there, and I was like, well, that doesn't represent the whole of North America. So, you know, I kind of wanted to have something else, and then I was like, oh, the Templars, yes, because it has the whole Christianity piece, and I was like, and obviously love the idea of the Templars, and there's so much kind of there's so much kind of mystery surrounding that group anyway, and so much sort of mythology surrounding that group that I was like, yes, brilliant, done. You know?
Is history like an area that you're like particularly interested in outside of writing, or did you just like go hard with a full research project for this book?
Pretty much just went hard. I studied history at school, and I never really like gelled with it. I don't know whether I love history in theory, and I love you know, people tell you like interesting snippets about history. I'm like, I always find that really interesting. I didn't love studying it. I don't know if it's just the time periods that we ended up studying, or you know, you end up not necessarily just doing the interesting bits. But it's not something that I would necessarily kind of sit down and read a book about, or you know, choose to watch a show about, unless it was something that really kind of hooked me. Like if someone did you know, let's look at the history of King Arthur in Cornwall, I might be like, oh yes, that sounds
I feel similarly to you. Like I didn't enjoy history at school, but the areas of interest history that I'm more interested in are ones like the ones represented in the book, like things like the Druids, and like if anything on King Arthur was on television, like a documentary, I would definitely watch that. I just feel like they pick some real boring stuff for school, and then that makes you not want to take it any further, and you never learn any more.
I know, and then you like the things that you have to learn aren't necessarily like the fun things, you know. And then and I remember there's this guy I used to work with when I worked in London, and he was like really into all of the history in the centre of London. This is other part of the influence actually for the book, because the first bit, the pagan headquarters, is set in the city of London. And you know, he just was so enthusiastic, and we ended up going on this like walking tour around the city. And he'd be like, oh, this happened over here and that happened over here, and you know, like all of the old stuff being kind of intermingled with all of the newer stuff. It was just like actually really interesting. You know. So.
Why did you choose London as your main like center for the story?
Because I'm from the UK, so I was like, well, I know the UK. They speak English, which is handy for me. And London, and I again, it's just because of that history, really. So I love I love that. I worked in London for a long time. I worked in that area for a long time, and so I kind of had walked around all of those places and had kind of seen it. And again, there's something kind of magical about that area, which I think hasn't necessarily been represented in a lot of the books that I've read. I think there aren't that many that are set in the UK. I'm sorry, lots of people are gonna tell me that I just need to broaden my reading horizons, and they're probably right. But the ones that I've read, they don't seem to be set there. Which is actually why I'm going to complete Samantha Shannon's books. I would really like enjoyed the setting of them because they're in London, so or they start there. So yeah, I think it's something I know. I could draw a lot on my own personal experience in terms of a lot of implications in the book. And there's something about London as well that it's a financial centre. It felt like a headquarters to me.
Yeah, it does fit that vibe with the everything happens in London, you know. I get quite bitter about it as somebody from the north that everything's about London because I'm like, what about Manchester? What about York? But is A Discovery of Witches set in London?
Oxford.
I haven't read it, but I thought it was set in London.
I love those books. So I really like them. But yeah, London to start with. And I agree with you. Like I get really annoyed because we ended up in London, and then we wanted to move to the southwest because that's where all of my husband's family are. It's where we like, you know, we really love that area, and it's impossible. It's annoying that more stuff is not in other cities. I agree with you.
Yeah. So in terms of like the research that you did do for the book, are you a pantser or a plotter essentially? So did you plan out the book? Did you do all of your research first, or did you like just start writing and then research as you were going?
I think I'm a bit of a halfway house, honestly. Yes. Sorry, I'm just about to pull my camera over with my foot. I get like an idea, and then I kind of understand the big picture arc. I get a kind of big, okay, this is where this book's going, and this is where the series is going. And only because there's too much in the series. So I kind of feel like I know what the series arc's going to be, and I'm like, whoa, can't write that in one go. I have to like scale this back. And then I'm like, okay, so this is the first book's arc. And then I start thinking about, okay, well, where's it going to start and how? And then I start writing down kind of sections to be like, okay, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And I'll get a certain way through. And I'll do a bit of research about that if I need to, but I tend not to go heavy on the research to start off with. I tend to kind of get the story, the characters to a certain point. And I'll get to a certain point and I'll just be like, okay, I'm done with this now. I can't think any further through until, and it won't be at the end of the book. It'll be like somewhere in the middle. And I'm like, okay, this is all I can do because more stuff's going to change. I need to write to this point because I know loads of stuff is going to change by the time I get there. And so there's no point in doing the rest of it, really. And then as I'm writing it, I'll do a lot of the research at that point. So things like the wedding cup was, you know, when I got to that point, I was like, so it's one of the artifacts that they used to try and wake up Omari because it had sentimental value to her in a past life. And so at that point I was like, okay, now I need to know the details of exactly what this should look like. And, you know, that's when I would then go and do the research. So a bit of a kind of mixed bag, really.
I always struggle because I've tried to write, but it's the planning and the plotting that really gets me, because I'm the kind of person who will just write, like I'll start with whatever inspired me, and it'll be like, I don't know, halfway through this imaginary book that I never wrote because I couldn't build around that. So I always find it fascinating to find out how other people write and like what their process is, because I think it's such a personal thing.
Yeah, totally. I was going to say, and I then had to do this whole exercise at the end of this book because it is so complicated and there are so many past lives, and like, okay, well, what features did they have? What things have I said about them in their past lives that I now need to make sure is consistent for like the rest of the book? So it's like going back through like plotting timelines and creating spreadsheets, and you know, so I think it's going to be more meticulous for book 2 and 3 because of all of the stuff laid down in book 1.
Do you know where the series is going to end then? Do you have that in mind?
I know the very broad brushstrokes of like the big picture arc around the relationship with the Templars, and something else I can't talk about. But the foundations are kind of laid in book 1 for where it's going to go.
Wow. Wow. That is just planning that far ahead. I just don't think I can wrap my mind around it. I'm normally very organized, but in things like writing and creative things, I'm kind of just like, I just take the idea and just run with it.
And lots of people do that, right? And they do really well with it. So I think sometimes you don't back yourself into a corner. And right. And you just, and I have to be, and as I say, like, I think for the first book especially, it's amazing what you can change as well with just a sentence here and there. So you get to the end of the book and then you're like, oh, I don't like that very much. And it's amazing how much you can change just by altering a couple of paragraphs here and a couple of paragraphs there. Only
we have 2 questions asking how many books will be in the series.
I think 3 at this stage, maybe 4, but I'm hoping. I think 3.
Are they all going to be around a similar length?
It's impossible to say, and they won't be any shorter. I think from what I've got, so I'm about 10,000 words into book 2 right now, and I think, and so book 1 was 80,000 words, and a normal book length is anywhere between like 70 and 100, 120. So I think it will probably be more than 80. I've got a lot of material to get through, and I keep planning it, being like, no, stop! I can't have any more in this book. I've got too much to work with. So I think it will probably be around the 90 mark, but I mean, who knows?
Are we going to be following the same characters?
It's going to get bigger in book 2. So yes, we are following the same characters. But I have quite a few characters in book 1, so it's got a kind of a bit of an Alona Andrews Hidden Legacy vibe. If anyone's read that, there's that whole kind of family, extended family, lots of people on the outside. And I think as soon as you have kind of political groups, that almost necessitates more, because you kind of need representatives from every single, that whole Game of Thrones where you've just got people from everywhere that you kind of need to manage. So we are still following the same characters, but not as closely as we do in book 1. So they still have points of view, and they're still very central to the story. But we're also going to follow a couple of other storylines because of what's happening. And in order to, I can't really say why, but without spoiling it. But in order to get them out of the predicament that they are currently in, it necessitates additional skills, which the characters that we know now don't necessarily possess themselves.
I see why that would be. Yeah, I was wondering, is there a reason why you chose to go with a big cliffhanger kind of ending with this one? Because it hurts a little bit. I can't lie.
I'm sorry. I love a cliffhanger. I do love a cliffhanger. I love writing cliffhangers, and I think most of my books are cliffhangers. And I think that's just how they kind of happen in my head. And I think with this one, because of what we need, the resolution that we need to get to for Casper and Amari necessitates her going where she goes. And then she can't I can't spoil it. But she's kind of, we can't resolve that without going through a significant amount of more plot that is going to happen in book 2. So, and that's part of the macro arc. A lot of that won't even be resolved until book 3. So, that is a lot of the macro arc is to do with that relationship between the pagans and the Templars.
Yeah. So
it's going to take a while to resolve all of that, although the characters will obviously move around a lot within that. But yeah, I think I got to the point where I was like, okay, there were a couple of big reveals towards the end, a couple of kind of twist reveals, and I was like, okay, now I feel like I've resolved that part. And then I'm like, and it's too big to resolve the rest, because that is it's the macro arc for the series.
I definitely see that. Just it still hurts. I do love the cliffhanger ending because I actually like pain when I'm reading. if there's something really shocking or really sad or really dynamic at the end of a book, I'm like, oh, I like that because it hurts after I finished. Like, and then you just think about it and like, well, what's gonna happen? Like, I don't know what's gonna happen.
I didn't think it was that bad, but people are like, it's a cliffhanger. I was like, is it? Is it? I mean, I guess it is. It is. Yeah, I mean, it is.
The dynamic is very different at the end than it is at the beginning. What is your favorite element to write? Are you more of a fan of like the plot, the world building, or the characters?
I would say I used to be really plot driven. I think that was the thing that for like my trilogy, that the Relic Trilogy, that was the thing that I was most interested in, and the world building and how the energy and everything fit together. I was definitely, that was my main focus there. And then I think I've kind of moved more as I've kind of written more. So this one, I'd say the characters take more of a central stage. I think also because it's in our world as opposed to being in an epic setting, less world building is, there's still a lot of world building to do, but it's less, you don't have to explain how everything in the world works.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that can take a little bit of a backseat. So I think it's probably more balanced. I wouldn't say that I think when I'm reading books, I really like world, I like all of it. So yeah, exactly. Don't we all? You know, I think I probably spent more time developing the characters in this than I have in anything else I've ever written. And which is fun actually. You know, I think, and I we'll do that more going forwards. But I think also I love plot twists. I love having stuff that's like layered on top of each other when I'm reading. So that's really important to me as well, like layering as many different things, and then the reveals. I love a big reveal.
Yeah, so do I, especially when you can see, like, if you reread it, you could see the groundwork being laid that leads to the reveal. That is my favorite thing. Like, I read a lot of like epic fantasy and do like Easter egg hunting where I'm like writing down every little thing, like this has to be relevant because they've said it like 5 times. We have to see this later.
And that was literally what I had to do. Like, I love when people don't get it. I love it. And when you're writing it as an author, you're like, oh, are people going to get this or not? But then also, I ended up doing loads of Easter egg hunting for book. So I had to go back into book 1 and Easter egg hunt for book 2 and 3 to make sure. So I'm like, okay, I've put this in, which is like, do we have to do that in book? You know, like, it's like, so there are also quite a few Easter eggs in book 1 for future books. That I'm, making sure actually we get the payoff for them.
Was it challenging for you to shift from being more of a plot-driven writer to being a character-driven writer, or is it something that you found quite natural, just transferring over?
Yeah, I found it quite natural. I think I wrote a contemporary romance, which is also going to come out later this year, which I haven't quite finished yet, but and it will come out under a separate pen name. But it was in a first person point of view, and I think that makes you, it pushes you closer to the characters and pushes you inside their head more than you are when you're doing third person. So I think that also kind of was quite a good exercise, like as a writing exercise as much as anything else. And so I think that made it a bit easier to kind of, I'd already kind of had a little bit of practice being more character focused. So yeah, I think it was a good natural progression. I didn't find it too hard.
Yeah. Who was the hardest character to write?
Struggle
to get in the mind of.
I think Rose, probably, who is the leader of the pagan nation.
Yes.
Yeah, because she's a bit closed. She's quite hard as a person. She's quite severe as a person, and she's like, no nonsense. Like, I don't want any of you whinging at me. Like, go and sort your own problems out. Which I love as a character, and especially as an older female character. I think I really enjoyed writing her because I think we need more of that in the world generally. But I think because of that, and she's kind of very loosely based on my grandmother. Like, she was kind of a bit of an inspiration for her. And my grandmother, everyone was like, "Oh, she was a hard lady, wasn't she?" I think she mellowed a little bit in her old age, but she was, definitely, you wouldn't mess with her. No. and so I think, you know, part of it was like I never really got inside her head, you know, I never completely cracked her. And so I think there was a little bit of that going on when I was writing Rose as well. Like, it's hard to get in.
Because something about Nation of the Sun as well is that there are quite a lot of characters throughout, like the pagans. The core group of pagans is quite large. Did you struggle to have so many characters in there?
I didn't, because I know what they're all there for.
Yeah.
And I know they're going places. So I'm using them all now. So, you know, I know some of them in book one is kind of like, what purpose are they serving? But I know, you know, for me, they all had like these distinct identities, and they had like a purpose for why they're there. And in book two, as the world expands and as their scope expands away from this course, you know, we need more people to go away and do other things. So they all have these kind of purposes as we go through other books. And I do think it's a bit like that. Have you read Hidden Legacy?
I keep getting it recommended to me, but I have not picked it up yet.
It's so good, so good. And it's a bit like that in that she has this big cast of characters who are like all a family, and they all live together, and I loved that. And it's kind of part of the inspiration for having the nations all living together, you know, and all kind of having this little hub. And she's got kind of cousins and siblings and things who aren't as central in the first book, and then they actually, you know, a lot of them actually get their own books as you go down the line. And so I think it's a little bit like that. So there are probably some in book one where you're like, do we need these people here? But as we go through, it will all become clear, hopefully, and so long as nothing terrible happens. Characters can sometimes, you know, like turn on you. Like, we should have cut you out in book one. And so there are a lot of them, but I think they all need to be there.
Do you have a favorite?
I think Tally might be my favorite.
Good choice.
Do you have a favorite?
I'm not sure. I do really like Rose because I think there is a lot more to her than we have seen. Like I know that she knows things that she's not telling anyone, which is I'm interested to see where that goes. And you also really like Casper as well, of course. Like, how could I not?
Casper's pretty great.
So as an indie author, do you have like a routine to your writing? Like, do you have a publishing schedule that you set for yourself, or do you kind of just publish, like just take as long as you need for a book and then publish when you're done?
Yeah, I guess I'm becoming a bit more disciplined about it. So until fairly recently, I still had a full-time job and was, you know, so kind of had to fit writing around that, and have two young kids, still do have two young kids who are at home. So, you know, it's kind of juggling around them and trying to get into as much of a routine as possible around nap times and, you know, utilizing television time when required. And then, you know, so I think I'm actually really excited because both of my kids will be in school from September. So that's going to give me loads more time to kind of have more of a regular like routine, I guess. So I'm hoping by then I'll get into more of an absolute, you know, okay, this is every day I'll be doing this and this and this and this. And, you know, hopefully that will, because I really like that. And I have got into a bit of a routine, but it just gets chopped around a lot depending upon whether my kids are at school or, you know, preschool or what's going on. It has to be quite fluid. So yeah, September, I'm excited.
How long does it take you to write a book normally? Do they all vary?
They have varied. Just because of time though, you know, so I think they probably take about the same amount of time to write, but I just haven't had the same amount of time to give them. Not that long. I can write fairly quickly. I did NaNoWriMo a couple of years ago, and I can't remember what I got, but 60,000 words or something in the month. So it's definitely, you know, it's definitely, I don't find it hard to write once I sit down and do it. It's more about just finding the time to sit down and do it.
Yeah, 60,000 words in a month is a lot, because that's almost an entire book, like, of a standard length. That's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a mad what some of the authors do. What's Marissa Mayer? No, who wrote like Scarlet, Cinder?
Marissa Mayer.
Yeah, it's her. Okay, I was having a moment. Yeah, she did NaNoWriMo actually, and she wrote like 100,000 words in a month or something ridiculous. I mean, it was very impressive.
That is very impressive. I was thinking actually about doing NaNoWriMo this year, because I've had a couple of ideas, but I just can't commit the time to write in. But I know that I should just do it when I'm in the mood and when I have an idea. So I was like, should I do it this year? Just like see what happens. But we'll have to see if I can, because it's coming up to Christmas as well, when NaNoWriMo is, which is like a busy time for me work-wise and stuff. But is it something you do regularly, or did you just do it the one time?
I did it the one time, but I was going to do it again this year. I wish I had. Well, I would have done it, but I was editing one book. I was right in the middle of editing, and I was like, I can't mess up my release schedule, and I know I'm not going to have time to both edit and also I was starting to think about doing Faro Feb, although it wasn't until a little bit later. Anyway, I think it was, I was like, okay, I'm not going to have time to actually realistically do it because I'm editing.
Yeah.
But I would I'm planning to do it again this year, so long as I'm not again editing.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not that bad because it's something like 1,500 or 1,600 words a day, which is really, so long as you commit to doing it every day, and also so long as you get ahead early. That's you can get a couple of 3,000 word days in early. You feel like you've got a bit of a buffer, and it doesn't feel that hard. I think if you get behind, it can get a bit demoralizing. But yeah,
okay, sorry.
I didn't find it that hard, because actually once you're committed to it, like 1,500 words a day isn't that bad.
No, I know I see a lot of people planning on Twitter, so they do like the full outline, and chapter breakdowns and everything. So when it actually hits NaNoWriMo, they know exactly what they're doing, which I think would be massively helpful. But I just don't think that I would do that. I think I just sit down on November 1st and be like, I'm going to write a book right now. Just see what happens.
Yeah, but that's how some people write, like that might be the method for you.
I think I might be more of an editor. So like I'll just write a whole ton of stuff, and then I'll actually write the book properly in the edits when I realize that nothing makes sense because I wrote it all out of order.
I mean, like stranger things have happened. I think they probably might work for you.
Say, do you write out of order or do you write in order? Because I know some people like start at the end or the middle.
Yeah, I was speaking to Scarlett Sinclair yesterday on our live yesterday, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I just write a load of scenes and then I kind of like work out how they fit together." That's not what I do. I write from the beginning to the end, and I will go through and I'll hear in my head, like snippets of conversation that I think, and I'll like all of a sudden I'll be like, in the next scene this is going to happen, or in 3 scenes time when we come back to these people, this is something that somebody's going to say to someone. So I'll like write parts of the scene ahead of time, but only really because I've got to a certain point and I can now, I now know more about what's going to happen next based on what I've just written.
As an indie author again, what is like your favorite element of being self-published?
I think it's probably just the freedom to do what you want to do, and being able to publish on the timetable that you want, and kind of not being beholden to anyone else. I think I've heard, you hear all kinds of horror stories about people being traditionally published and having their books chopped apart and having no creative control and not earning out their advance, and then the books are taken out of print and they can't do anything about it or whatever. And I'm not at all against traditional publishing. I think there's space in the market for absolutely everybody. I think traditional publishers do a very good job for some of the authors that they represent. I think they do less of a good job for other of the authors that they represent. But I think as an indie author, the advantage you've got is you can release really quickly. You can learn from what's, from real feedback and see what's actually going on. You can write to market if people want, some people write to market. I've never done that. Maybe I should. Maybe I will at some point in the future. And you can switch things up much more easily. And I think the other thing is that a lot of traditionally published authors say is that they don't get that real-time feedback. So if I do a promotional thing, I can see then and there in real time pretty much if that's having any impact on my sales or not. Whereas for a traditionally published author, they kind of don't really know which bits of promotional work they're doing is having the biggest impact because they don't get that data,
What is on the flip side of that, what is the most challenging element of being self-published?
Having to do everything.
I can imagine.
And also, again, we were talking about yesterday, like having that machine behind you also brings legitimacy, and it brings, I've never been traditionally published, so I'm kind of projecting, but I imagine that it brings a kind of confidence almost, or like you have a team of people who believe in the work that is going out into the world, and they believe in it enough that they've chosen that over any other book, that the thousands of other books that they could have chosen, and they've put a lot of time and energy and effort into creating something that they want to stand behind, and I think that just just having that knowledge that you've got a team around you is something that you don't have as an indie author. It's literally, someone has put, I had an email from someone to say, oh, someone's put your book up on a website saying that it's like free downloads, so they're like pirating my book, and I was like, what do I do now?
There's nothing, you don't have the legal team that a traditional publisher has.
And also I don't know if they're just like clickbaiting people and they're actually so it's just, and all of these things take a huge amount of time, and you just don't have the team or kind of legal experts or whoever you need to just go, hey, can you just tell me what I'm supposed to do now?
So you predominantly, I know you just said that you have a contemporary romance coming out, but you predominantly write fantasy romance or like paranormal romance. And as well as that, you are also the creator of Faro Feb, which for everyone watching is a event that happens in February that celebrates fantasy romance. It has like a readathon element. There's author interviews, competitions and giveaways and things like that, and all sorts of good stuff centering around fantasy romance. So what is it about fantasy romance in particular that made you want to write in that genre?
So I read a lot of fantasy, and I've always read a lot of fantasy, and when I was younger I read obviously Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Divergent, all of those sort of books. I loved them. And I also read a lot of an author called Wilbur Smith, who is old school and a lot of people won't have heard of or might not have read. But he does like a lot of like adventure, has romance, not necessarily always a happy ending for everyone, but a lot of kind of like adventure, but with a lot of romance in there as well. And he had one particular series, which was an Egyptian series, which also had all these fantasy elements around kind of magic and stuff. And I was like, this is great. This is what I love reading. And I think every book that I read, when I read fantasy, I love that. I love the escapism, and I love the imagination, and the, just the worlds that people create. I find, just speaks to me, I guess. But I was always, when I read something like The Hunger Games or Divergent, I was always like, yeah, great romance, but I'd really like some more romance. Like, I'd like this to be more central to the theme. And so, then I started just kind of seeking out books like that. And it's, that was back in 2012, I think, when I first started writing in this area. And there weren't that many books. There still aren't that many books, which, and it's, there are more and more. And I think it's partly the publishers are shying away from them because I don't think there's a market for them, because they've had a tough time selling them, because no one's building a market for them, because the publishers think it's the bookseller's job to build the market, and the booksellers are like, well, don't have any books, and like what, it's just a bit of a mess. And that's why I started Fire of Feb, because I was like, oh, I know that there are some good books out there, and if only we could like match up people who want to read them with people who want to, who write them, everyone would be happy, and it would be a great place to be. So yeah, but I think it's just, I love that fantasy element, and I think the romance keeps me interested, and it adds this extra like, will they, won't they, when are they going to, what's it going to be like?
Definitely.
And I think the other thing is, I love contemporary romance as well, but sometimes I find that the conflict can get a bit like stale. Like, okay, 3/4 of the way through the book, there is going to be conflict, and sometimes it's brilliantly done, and you're like, it's just wonderful. And sometimes someone throws in something, and you're like, oh, you did that to create conflict because you have to, because that's
you have to have a conflict.
Yeah. And I don't think you get that in fantasy books to the same degree. Like, you have so much, the scope of conflict is just so much greater. There are so many different things that can give you the conflict. So
the thing with fantasy as well that I find is that it is mostly conflict. So you don't have to then create the conflicts. It's more about finding something that isn't a conflict within the story. And I do like contemporary romance as well. But with fantasy romance, the stakes feel a lot higher, because there's normally an element of death in there. Like, if something doesn't happen, like someone's going to die and these two people are going to be torn apart and they'll never be together, which is why I particularly, like, as we discussed, I like really sad things in books. So that really gets me every time.
Oh yeah, and like nations are going to fall, like it's and I think that's what part of the appeal of Game of Thrones or something like that. It's like this is an entire world we're talking about. It's not just small scale stuff.
No, it's a big plot, and I wish that series would finish.
They're going to, but the other one, Name of the Wind. I mean,
oh god, yeah.
At least for Game of Thrones, we've had like some kind of closure through the television series. I mean, let's not go there. But I mean, Name of the Wind.
I haven't read that yet, purely because like I read Game of Thrones because there's so many books already released, so I still had a long way to go through the series, and also I was watching the show. But Name of the Wind, people keep telling me to read it, and I just don't want to read 2 books and then not have the last one. There's so many. That is such a big thing in fantasy, though, just unfinished series, because they're so big.
I know, and I just, apparently it's written. I keep hearing these rumors to be like, oh, he's written it. It's like, well, I heard that rumor 2 years ago, and it's still not out in the world. So, they're brilliant. They're like brilliant, but
they are. Just need the series to finish. I mean, has it been 10, 15 years since the last one? It's been a long time.
Yeah, I think like 11 years or something. Yeah.
Are there any particular books or authors that inspired you yourself to write?
To like actually write, I don't know if there's any that I was like, I mean, all of the books that I've read definitely have inspired me and have, influenced me as an author. I don't think there was one that was like made me think, oh, I should start typing at my keyboard. I just think it's something that I'd always wanted to do, and I've always read a lot, and I used to like write letters to people when I was a kid, and just loved writing. And I think then when I was at university, and I was like writing essays, which obviously everyone always puts off to the last minute, and then I would like be writing it and then be like, oh, this is kind of fun. I quite like writing. And actually one of my lecturers in my final year, I wrote an essay that he gave me full marks for, and he was like, the narrative was gripping, and I was like, oh, maybe I could write something that someone would want to read, and I think that probably more than anything gave me confidence to think, okay, maybe I should try.
One of the reasons why I really want to write is because when I was in year 6, you take your little books like when you're leaving school and you have like your friends and your teachers sign them. My favorite teacher wrote in mine, I can't wait to read your first book. So now I'm like, I'm 28 now, so I was 10 or 11 then, and I still need to write that first book. Still have not gotten there.
Well, also the good thing that I think Lee Bardugo pointed out on Instagram not that long ago was like, writing is not something you have to do when you're young. You know, you've got time. There's always time to do it. So, having said that, I mean, you could write a novella. That, you know, like
I don't like reading novellas though. I don't like really short books. There's just not enough there for me.
I mean, I'm with you. I'm also like, I don't know how to like structure a novella. I don't think I read enough of them to really know, to like understand them enough to really know how to tackle it, you know.
I definitely feel that. Question from the chat: do you have a favorite spot to write?
The sofa. And it's really bad because I've given myself all these like back injuries. So when I left my last job and I was writing, like I should sit up. Even me saying this makes me want to sit up. I was like sitting at a desk every day and like it's all ergonomically set up and you're like, you care about that. And then I went to the sofa and was like this over my laptop that was on my lap. And then all of a sudden I have like these back and neck injuries and I have to go to like a physical therapist and they're like, like I think typing is and like sitting in the wrong position. Anyway, so yeah, I do, and I've had to basically like buy these like little desk things to go over my lap. But I think when my kids go to school in September, I'm gonna create a little writing in my house.
It might be good for your back that you do that. We have that. Oh, there was a message in the chat that I don't think I pulled up, but not that one. The monthly Faro Feb emails are amazing.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoy them. We thank you so much to Vella as well, Vella Roth, who's another author that everyone should check out. She is brilliant, and so she does most of the work for the monthly emails. We're going to start doing a monthly like wrap up of all of the new releases and things, and put those out on the different accounts we've got. And we also got a Discord channel as well, which for authors.
I didn't know
that. For fantasy romance authors, we made the one for readers as well as part of Faro Feb next year. Haven't decided yet, but yeah, which is a really great. Like we've got a great community going in there, so that's also very fun.
Oh, that's so good because like with a lot of fantasy romance is indie and self-published, so it's good to have, I guess, a community that has the same kind of experience as you, in the same industry as you, and the same struggles as you, for advice and support. Yeah, it's good. You got a great group of people. Do you have any fantasy romance recommendations? And this is the bit where I pull up Goodreads. I know. Okay. Yeah, I definitely do. So Ilona Andrews, I think the Hidden Legacy series is brilliant. Mentioned it a couple of times. Scarlett St. Clair, Touch of Darkness. I have that. I haven't read it yet. You should definitely read it. It's really good. Laura Thalasser, I've just read the first book in the Bargainer series. Love that. One of my favorite series. Desmond Flynn is my favorite book boyfriend. He is so sexy. Like, I know. I loved it. And I listened to the audiobook and I loved that too. So that I'd recommend. What's Amanda Boucher's series? I should know this. Promise of Fire? Or is the second one Heart of Fire? I'm sorry, Amanda. I'm completely useless. I'm just searching on. I've just accidentally pressed the wrong button, so no, it's not going to let me search. Oh, why can't I remember? I read that not even that long ago. I know. Promise of Fire, yeah, and then the second one's Breath of Fire, and the third one's Heart on Fire. Yeah. Okay, got it right. That's fine. Whew, had a moment there. Yeah, I'm just filling up what else have I read. I read Dark Wizard recently by Jeffy Kennedy. I really like that. Oh, I want to read from Jeffy Kennedy, but I have not yet. Yes.
I would go for that one. I really enjoyed that. What else? What have you been reading that's good?
What fantasy romance have I read recently? Well, I read Nation of the Sun.
Highly recommend you read that, obviously.
I recommend that you read that. Fortuna Sworn is one that I really like. Fairy romance. I love the Bargainer series. Oh, The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen.
Oh yeah, I love that too.
I've just finished, actually. I think that was the last book I finished, The Traitor Queen, the sequel to that.
Wolf Gone Wild. Have you read Wolf Gone Wild by Juliet Cross?
No.
Oh, loved it. It's like paranormal, so it's in our world as opposed to being epic. But it's such a good different twist on the paranormal romance. I loved it.
I feel like I've seen that cover somewhere recently, and I don't know where. She
took part in Fire Feb.
That could have been it.
And recently has released an audiobook, I think. So that might have been people were sharing because the audiobook.
I remember thinking like, oh, that's a pretty cover, but I'm really trying not to buy more books because with fantasy romance, I've been collecting the first book in a lot of series. So I have so many series that I need to read. Just not started them yet. I'm still trying to obviously continue with the ones that I've started, like Promise with Fire by Amanda Boucher. I still need to continue that. Been desperate to do it for months, but it just never seems to work out with how many books I usually have to read.
I mean, I know. So Fortuna Sworn, I've also just downloaded because I'm like, everyone has recommended. I know you guys spoke to Kelsey as well. Kelsey? Oh my goodness, I'm having such a name moment. So yeah, but it's like, yeah, it's hard to find the time. It's very hard to,
And because a lot of series tend to be quite long as well. Like I know Ash in the comments is talking about Wolfsmote, which is what some of my Patreon group call a series. It's called the Fae Guardian series, I think. The first book is called The Longing of Lone Wolves. And I haven't read that yet. They've all read it now, and they really, really enjoy it. But I do have the first 3 books, and then there's a vampire spin-off as well. And then with self-publishing as well, the release schedules can be so quick that it's like hard to keep on top of all of the series that you start. But I have so much that I'm excited to read.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good problem to have, isn't it?
Yeah. Too many books, too little time.
Elizabeth Hunter. I read the first book in her Erin Chronicles. Have you read any Elizabeth Hunter? It's not as steamy as a lot of other stuff, but I really enjoyed it.
Which series was it?
I read the Erin. Is it IRN?
Oh, the first book's the Scribd. That one.
Yes, that one exactly. But also her vampire. She had a vampire series that was out a few years ago. I read it like 7 years ago, maybe, or something. And I really enjoyed it. I read all 4 books like back to back.
There is a paranormal series that I read when I first got a Kindle, so it would have been about 7 years ago, and it was one where the first book was free on Kindle and the others were 99p, so I just downloaded it and didn't think anything of it because I didn't know the difference between like traditional publishing and indie publishing and everything at the time. But I think the author was called C.J. Archer, and it was a really good like historical ghost romance, which normally I would not have enjoyed. Like it's not something that I would think is, like elements that I want to see when I'm picking up a book, but I really, really like that, and I would like to reread it now that I have like more experience in, because I didn't even know what fantasy romance was at the time.
I mean, it's still basically an emerging genre, so I mean, that's not like it's not surprising. And I had a really hard time with my trilogy when I like first put it out, because it was like there weren't any comps, it was like it wasn't young adult, it wasn't adult, it was new adult, but new adult wasn't really a thing back then, and like it was just, I mean, so I think now it's at least there are some more books out and it's a bit more of a normal thing.
Yeah, and it's something that people actually are actively looking for. I think in the last 2 years maybe, I mean, I've started noticing more of a market for it since House of Earth and Blood was released. And that's when I started to really get into it, because I was like, you know what, actually, like I just really like romantic fantasy and I want more of that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't realize specifically which elements really made them. They like, someone might read a book and be like, I really enjoyed that, but they won't necessarily analyze in further detail like what was it about that book that I really enjoyed? And I think more people are starting to realize, maybe like because there are more books like this on the market, that they're reading them and they're enjoying them and they're like, oh yeah, I would like more of this kind of thing. So it's like spiraling, which is great.
I think it's a little bit difficult as well because with a lot of just general fantasy books, especially young adult, they have a romance subplot. So at first, like when I was reading like Sarah J. Maas for the first time, I just thought like, oh, this is just the same but with more romance. But that is actually fantasy romance, and then you have like general fantasy just with romance, and there is a difference. So when you kind of identify that it is a genre, it's a lot easier. And I actually think that there is so much to choose from in fantasy romance just because it is all indie. And there's so many authors out there, and you can take a chance on a book that's like free on Kindle Unlimited, and it could be so good. But it's obviously hard to grow a following and promotion, like to make people take the time to read a book as well is hard. So it could just be a hidden gem that nobody's noticed yet.
Totally. And I think that's what most indie authors would say, it's hard to get people to read your books because there's so much choice out there.
Mm-hmm. And it's a commitment to read a book. It takes a good, like, I'm a slow reader as well. So I think Nation of the Sun, for everybody watching, if they want to know how much time it's going to take, I think it was 4.5 hours, my Kindle told me. So that's not too bad. You can do 4.5. Oh, is the physical book floppy? That's a very important question.
Like that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
How do you mean?
Oh, do I have any? Do I have any floppy ones? I don't, but they're really like, they're more like the US paperbacks that have a lot of bend in them.
I don't know.
It's not super floppy.
It's not okay. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure.
Super floppy's usually good because it's the kind, like where you can put it in your hand and it just drops open and stays open.
No.
Those ones, yeah, they're just easier to read.
It's not like that. Kindle, I highly recommend Kindle.
Is it on Kindle Unlimited as well?
It is, yes. Yeah. Yes.
If anybody has any questions in the chat, we will be wrapping up in the next few minutes. So if you have any, let me know. Because I think I have gone through most of my questions. Oh, no, I haven't actually. We had some general questions. Oh, if you could live in any fantasy world, what would it be?
That's a hard one. Any fantasy world.
It is a hard one.
This is so hard. This is so hard.
I love how I ask these questions. I don't have an answer either.
I don't know. Oh, I feel like maybe something like A Touch of Darkness, like New Athens, because it's kind of contemporary, but there's like a lot of differences and like gods walking around. So, or actually KF Green's Demigods of San Francisco, again for the same reason, because it's kind of contemporary, but there are all kinds of differences. It's a hard question.
It is. I'm trying to think what my answer would be. It depends whether you want to survive as well. Like a lot of people take that into account, but I don't normally. Like I wouldn't mind living in the Wagner series world because Desmond Flynn is in it. See, that's my main driver. I'm like, well, Desmond Flynn's there, so I don't really care if I'd survive.
Yeah, I have to say, like, survival was high on my consideration list. Like to live. That, like, for me, is like contented, happy, long life, as opposed to certain death.
The Discord for the Faro Feb readers, that does not exist yet, does it?
No. Not for readers.
For next one.
Yeah, for writers, you can go on the Faro Feb website, which is www.farofeb.com, and all of the details are on there. About everything Faro Feb, in fact.
And you are still, as we've touched upon in this event, we've touched upon that you are still doing like monthly emails and stuff, and you're going to start doing wrap-ups and stuff for that. So for all things Faro Feb, all of the information is on the website. It is a really great resource for fantasy romance specifically. I know I always get asked for more fantasy romance recommendations, but I like to finish series before I start them, so it takes me a while to build up some more. But that is a great place to look, and I've got a lot of recommendations from there as well.
Good. Yeah, and I would say sign up to the newsletter, because that's where we kind of coordinate with authors to do like new release alerts and special discounts. So a lot of authors will time their special discounts to go out with certain newsletters. And so we always do a wrap up afterwards, but you might not get access to the offers and things, and with like giveaways and stuff also around the newsletter. So if you there's one email a month.
So not too bad. And there's lots of great authors involved. Like you've got Jennifer Armentrout was involved in Pharaoh Fab.
Yep.
Laura Thalassa.
She wasn't this year, but she almost certainly will next year.
She
missed it. But Danielle Jensen, Scarlett St. Clair, Juliette Cross, Amanda Boucher, Maria Vale, Jeffy Kennedy, Grace Lee Knox, Emma Ham, El Penelope, Colleen Cowley, Kel Carpenter, all like loads of wonderful authors.
So many. And all different types of fantasy romance as well, like paranormal, high fantasy,
and I think
all stuff.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that was almost most important to me when we started it, was like being as inclusive as we could, because although sometimes people think that there's this like hard line between like epic fantasy, so like fantasy in another world, versus low fantasy, which is in our world, there's so much nuance within that. And you know, sometimes there's a portal to another world, and sometimes there are paranormal creatures in an epic world, like in From Blood and Ash. And you know, so for me it was just like, okay, everything that has fantasy elements and also a heavy romance kind of element, all in.
We've had Elise Cover.
Yeah, she wasn't, but you never know for next year.
This is very exciting. I'm very excited for next year already.
I keep thinking that I need to start like getting on it, because it will come up so quickly. And I've got a few, and I'm going to change the format a little bit, and I just need to think through that and start.
Yeah. It's hard when you have multiple projects. Like I know, because I do more than one thing on a day-to-day basis. It's so hard, especially when you're planning something like an event and just sorting all of that out, because when you've got more than one thing on, you have to plan it further in advance because you can't dedicate all your time to it. So honestly, for the first time this year, it was such a good event with loads of different stuff going on and loads of different people involved. So with it growing as the years go on, I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, people keep saying conference, in-person conference. I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. But maybe, you know, I think maybe that we, even in February next year, I mean, I'm not promising anything, but maybe we might be able to do like a small kind of test gathering somewhere, depending obviously on COVID as well.
Yeah.
Which hopefully by then we'll have calmed down mostly. So yeah, you never know. We might do that.
Exciting. Somebody just asked, has BookTube helped the fantasy romance genre?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think building a community is really important, and I think, you know, books don't just kind of do well in isolation. You know, books seem to do really well when lots of people start talking about them, and then other people hear about them, and therefore they pick them up, and then they talk about them, you know, and it kind of like spirals from there, which is why, especially now, you know, even if you look at like the big bestsellers, like Where the Crawdads Sing was the bestseller last year, I believe, and it came out in like 2018, because of that spiral effect. And you know, like its popularity then means more people see it, which means more, you know, and it just kind of spirals and spirals. And I think in the absence of people like the BookTube community, and Bookstagram and TikTok now, you know, in the absence of all of that, there's not as many people to talk about it, which means it doesn't, people don't hear about, you know, that spiral doesn't happen in the same way. So yeah, I think you guys play an absolutely vital role in building the genre.
Thank you very much. I try my best. So I think that just about wraps us up. I'm pretty sure I scheduled this a couple of weeks ago and it's been a terrible month, but just throwing everything around now. I'm pretty sure that I put the link to be able to get Nation of the Sun in my description box if you are interested and you would like to pick it up. And it is available on Kindle Unlimited as well if you have that. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Loved being here.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. And yeah, all the links that you guys will need will be in my description box. And I will see you guys next time.